An expectant single mother and her millionaire CEO began sharing secrets while working late. Silence turned to love when secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The December rain pounded against the windows of the 23rd floor, creating a hypnotic rhythm that echoed through the empty hallway of Smith & Associates corporate law. Emily Johnson adjusted her bag on her shoulder and sighed, feeling the weight of 5 months of pregnancy as she walked toward her desk. It was almost midnight on a Friday, and she had returned to the office just to pick up the merger contracts she had forgotten in her rush to leave early. The office, located in the heart of Wall Street, exuded power and money, even in the nighttime silence. The distinctive smell of leather from the imported armchairs mingled with the persistent aroma of espresso that had permeated the rooms since the start of the workday. The automatic lights turned on as she passed, creating a lit path through the maze of desks and partitions. Emily stopped abruptly upon hearing the unmistakable sound of fingers typing rapidly on a keyboard. The noise came from the direction of the president's office, where a yellowish light seeped under the mahogany door. She frowned, instinctively checking the watch on her wrist. Who could be working at this hour? Impossible, she murmured to herself, cautiously approaching. She knew the habits of all the employees well, and no one was accustomed to staying so late, especially not on a Friday before the new year. Through the frosted glass of the door, she could make out the silhouette of a man hunched over a desk. Her heart raced as she recognized the unmistakable profile of David Smith, the CEO of the company. At 35, he was known for his impeccable demeanor and professional coldness, always dressed in tailored suits with an expression that discouraged any form of intimacy. But there, in that moment, he looked completely different. The Italian silk tie was loosened around his neck. The sleeves of his dress shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular forearms she had never noticed. His dark brown hair, usually slicked back with gel, fell rebelliously over his forehead as he focused on the computer screen. Emily hesitated. At the threshold of the door, torn between the need to grab her documents and the desire not to disturb him. During the 2 years she had worked at the company, her interactions with David had been limited to polite greetings in the elevators and formal introductions during meetings. He was a distant, almost mythical figure who ran the company with an iron fist and never showed interest in the personal lives of the employees. "Excuse me," she finally said, lightly knocking on the ajar door. David looked up from the documents, and for a moment she saw something she had never expected to find in his gaze. Genuine surprise, followed by something that seemed almost vulnerable. For a few seconds, they just stared at each other, as if they were two completely different people from those who exchanged formal greetings during the day. "Emily," he said, and she noticed his voice sounded deeper and hoarser than usual. "Sorry, I didn't expect to find anyone here at this hour." "I apologize for interrupting," she replied, feeling her cheeks flush slightly. "I forgot some contracts on my desk and need to review them over the weekend." David nodded, watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She was aware of her disheveled appearance. The maternity black dress she had chosen in the morning now looked wrinkled, and she was sure her lipstick had completely worn off. "The merger contracts with Energy Corp?" he asked, surprising her with his specific knowledge of her work. "Exactly. How did you—" "I've been keeping a closer eye on your work than you might think," David interrupted, then seemed to realize the informality of the comment. "I mean, the legal department has been producing excellent analyses lately." Emily felt a strange sensation in her stomach that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. There was something in the way he looked at her, an intensity that made her question whether she really knew him as little as she thought. "Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'll just grab the documents and—" David, he said suddenly. You can call me David, especially considering we apparently both have the same vice of working late. She smiled for the first time since entering the room, noticing how his face softened when he wasn't in CEO mode. All right, David, and thank you for not reprimanding me for being here after hours. That would be quite hypocritical of me, he replied, gesturing to the stack of papers scattered across his desk. Besides, I imagine you have your reasons for needing extra hours. The comment instinctively made her place a hand on her belly, where a small bump was already visible even under the dress. David followed the movement with his eyes, but made no further comment. Yes, well, she stammered, feeling exposed. Things have been a bit complicated lately. David tilted his head as if genuinely interested, but did not press for details. Instead, he stood up from his chair and walked to the window, watching the rain continue to fall over the city lights. New York never sleeps, does it? He said, almost as if speaking to himself. Sometimes I wonder if there's more life happening during the night than during the day. Emily stepped closer hesitantly, standing a few paces away from him. From that position, she could see their reflections in the window glass. Two lonely figures in the empty office, separated by much more than just the hierarchical difference. I tend to think that the night reveals who we really are, she said, surprised by her own courage to philosophize, with the CEO. During the day, we all wear professional masks, but when we're alone with our thoughts and responsibilities, we show our true face, David added, turning to face her. That's a very insightful observation. For a moment, the silence between them was filled only by the sound of the rain and the air conditioning. Emily felt scrutinized, as if he were trying to decipher something in her expression. Can I ask you a personal question? David finally said. She nodded, though her heart quickened slightly. Are you facing this situation alone? The question was too direct, too intimate, for a conversation between boss and employee, but something in the way he phrased it, with no apparent judgment, made her respond honestly. Yes, she simply said. It's been like this for a few weeks. David briefly closed his eyes, as if the answer had caused him some physical pain. When he opened them again, there was a determination there that she couldn't quite interpret. I imagine it's not easy to juggle all of this with work demands. It's not, she admitted, but I need to work, especially now. Of course, he said, and there was something almost protective in his voice. Well, if you ever need flexibility in your hours or any kind of accommodation, don't hesitate to speak to me directly. Emily looked at him in surprise. That was not the cold, distant demeanor she expected from the man who ran meetings with an iron fist and never showed interest in his employees' personal problems. Thank you, she said, genuinely touched. That means a lot to me. David returned to his desk, but did not sit down. Instead, he leaned against the edge, watching her with an expression she couldn't fully decipher. Emily, he said, and she noticed. It was the first time he used her name so naturally. I know we don't know each other well personally, but if you ever need to talk, or if there's anything I can do to help, my door will always be open. The offer was so unexpected that she was speechless for a few seconds. There was a sincerity in his voice that completely contrasted with the corporate image he maintained during the day. Why are you doing this? She asked, unable to contain her curiosity. David hesitated, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that made him seem younger and more vulnerable. Maybe because I recognize something familiar in the situation, he finally said. Or maybe because I believe no one should go through tough times completely alone. There was a story behind that answer, Emily was sure. A personal pain that explained the unexpected empathy and offer of help. But she knew it wasn't the right moment to probe deeper. "Thank you, David," she said, using his name for the first time. "Really?" He then smiled, a small but genuine smile that completely transformed his expression. In that moment, under the soft light of the desk lamp, with the rain creating a curtain of privacy around them, Emily realized that she might know much less about David Smith than she had imagined, and even more surprisingly, she realized she wanted to know more. The next 3 months brought a subtle and unexpected routine. Emily discovered that David kept irregular night hours, often working late between Tuesdays and Thursdays. She, in turn, began to extend her hours on those same days, initially justifying to herself that she needed to catch up on work before her maternity leave. It was a Thursday in March when the dynamic between them began to change more noticeably. Emily was organizing the last audit processes when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She didn't need to look to know it was David. She had memorized the sound of his Italian shoes against the marble floor. "Working late again?" he asked, appearing in the entrance of her cubicle. He was more casual than usual, with his suit jacket draped over his arm and the top button of his shirt undone. "I could say the same thing," she replied, looking up from the documents. At 7 months pregnant, sitting for long periods was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, and she noticed that David discreetly observed the gesture she made to relieve the tension in her back. "Does it hurt?" he asked, with a genuine concern that surprised her. "It's normal at this stage," she said, trying to downplay the discomfort. "The baby is growing and—" "You should be at home resting," David interrupted, frowning. "You shouldn't be here this late, especially not in your condition." Emily felt a pang of irritation. "My condition doesn't make me invalid, David, and I need to work." "I'm sorry," he said immediately, realizing her defensive tone. "I didn't mean to sound condescending. It's just that I care." The word hung between them, loaded with a meaning neither was ready to fully explore. Emily studied his face, searching for signs that this was merely professional politeness, but found something much deeper in his dark eyes. "Why do you care?" she asked softly. David hesitated, leaning against the doorframe, as if he needed physical support. "Can I be honest with you?" Emily nodded, feeling her heart quicken slightly. "Since that night in December, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," he began, choosing his words carefully. "About what you said regarding how the night reveals who we really are. And I realized I've spent the last 3 years living only during the day, wearing a mask that I don't even recognize anymore." He paused, running a hand over his face in a tired gesture. "My marriage ended in a devastating way. My ex-wife had an affair with my best friend and business partner. When I found out, I lost not only my wife, but also my original company and most of my friends." Emily felt her chest tighten with the evident pain in his voice. "David, you don't have to—" "I do," he said firmly, "because I want you to understand that when I look at you, I see a strength that I've forgotten how to have. You're going through a tough situation, and yet you're here, fighting, holding on. This inspires me in a way I can't explain." The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Emily could hear the sound of her own breathing mixed with the low hum of the air conditioning. Outside, New York continued its frantic nightlife, but here, in that small space between the cubicles, time seemed to stand still. "Your former partner," she began hesitantly, "is that why you started this company alone?" David nodded, a bitter expression crossing his face. "I swore to myself that I would never fully trust anyone again, that I would keep everyone at a professional distance." "And did it work?" Emily asked, although she already knew the answer from the vulnerability in his eyes. "It worked," he admitted, "until you showed up working late on a rainy December night." Emily's heart raced. There was an intensity in the way he looked at her that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. But at the same time, She felt the weight of the situation. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and he was her boss. "David," she started, but was interrupted by a sudden movement in her belly. The baby kicked hard, causing her to arch slightly and place her hand on the spot. "Is everything okay?" he asked, immediately alert. "Yes," she laughed softly. "It's just the baby reminding me that he's here. He gets more active at night." "He?" David asked, and there was something almost tender in his voice. "I don't know yet," Emily admitted. "I decided I wanted to be a surprise, but I have a feeling it's a boy." David looked at her belly with an expression she couldn't fully interpret. There was curiosity, but also something that seemed almost melancholic. Can I ask about the father?" he said hesitantly. Emily sighed, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest whenever she thought of Mark. "We dated for 2 years. We talked about marriage, kids, future. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought he would be happy." She paused, struggling against the emotion. "But he said he wasn't ready to be a father, that the pregnancy wasn't planned, and that I should handle the situation." "Handle?" David repeated, and there was a dangerous hardness in his voice. "He wanted me to have an abortion," Emily said directly. "When I refused, he said I was being selfish, that I was ruining our plans. A week later, I found out he was already seeing someone else." David clenched his fists, a vein pulsing in his temple. "What kind of man abandons a pregnant woman?" "The kind of man who never really loved me," Emily replied with a serenity that surprised her. "It took time to accept, but now I see it was for the best. I don't want my child to grow up thinking love is conditional." "You have incredible strength," David said softly, "and your child will be very lucky to have you as a mother." Emily felt her eyes burn with unshed tears. It had been so long since anyone made her feel strong, capable, admired. Since Mark left her life, she had gotten used to carrying not just the physical weight of pregnancy, but also the emotional one. "Thank you," she whispered. "Sometimes I don't feel that strong." "Everyone has moments of weakness," David said, leaning in slightly. "What matters is how we rise afterward." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, a silent connection forming between them. Emily could feel the sincerity radiating from him, the vulnerability he rarely allowed others to see. "David," she finally said, "can I ask a personal question?" "After everything I've just shared, I think we have the right to ask each other personal questions," he replied with a small smile. "Have you ever thought about starting over? About trusting someone again?" His expression turned thoughtful, and he took a moment to respond. "Honestly, no. Until recently I was convinced it was safer to keep my distance from anything that could hurt me again. And now?" David looked directly into her eyes, and she saw something there that made her hold her breath. "Now, I'm starting to think that maybe living safely isn't really living." His phone rang at that moment, breaking the intimate atmosphere that had formed between them. David looked at the device with irritation, but answered professionally. "Smith," he said, but his voice was rougher than usual. Emily watched as he listened to someone on the other end of the line, noticing how his expression gradually closed off. "I understand. Yes, I'll be there on Monday to sort this out." When he hung up, he had returned to the controlled CEO she knew during the day. "Problems?" she asked. "Nothing that can't wait until Monday," he said. But she noticed the tension in his shoulders. "It was my secretary, reminding me about a meeting I completely forgot." Emily frowned. "Your secretary calls you at 11 at night?" David hesitated, and she realized there was something he wasn't telling. "Marcia is very dedicated to her work, sometimes too dedicated." There was something in the way he said that made Emily feel a slight discomfort, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Instead, she decided to focus on the present moment. "Well," she said, starting to organize her papers, "I think I should head home. Tomorrow is Friday, and I have a prenatal appointment in the afternoon." "Is everything okay with the baby?" David asked immediately, concern evident in his voice. "Everything is perfect," she assured him. "It's just a routine checkup." David nodded, but she noticed he seemed to want to say something more. Instead, he helped her gather her belongings and walked with her to the elevator. "Emily," he said when the doors opened, "thank you for the conversation today. It's been a long time since I could talk about all of this." "Thank you for trusting me," she replied sincerely. As the elevator doors closed between them, Emily leaned against the mirrored wall and watched her reflection. Her eyes sparkled in a way that hadn't in a long time. For months, there had been a flush in her cheeks that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. For the first time since Mark had left her life, she wondered if it might be possible to feel something for someone again, and even more frightening, if someone could feel something for her, even while pregnant and carrying all the emotional baggage she had. From the 23rd floor, David watched the taillights of the taxi taking Emily home, feeling something unknown stirring in his chest. It had been years since he allowed himself to feel anything beyond professional ambition and determination. But Emily Johnson was changing that, one late-night conversation at a time. June arrived, with the typical chill of New York's winter, and with it, the traditional company summer festival. Emily, now 8 months pregnant, had volunteered to coordinate the event, much to David's silent concern as he watched her from afar, organizing decorations and checking supplier lists. It was a Tuesday when she discovered something about him that she had never imagined. Walking toward the conference room to check the space where the stage would be set up, she heard the unmistakable sound of a guitar coming from inside the room. The melody was Asa Branca, played with a skill and sensitivity that made her stop at the threshold of the slightly open door. David was sitting in one of the chairs, the guitar resting on his lap, his fingers gliding over the strings with a familiarity that spoke of years of practice. His eyes were closed, and he was softly humming the lyrics of the classic song. There was a peace in his expression that Emily had never seen, a raw vulnerability that completely contrasted with the corporate image he maintained. "When I looked at the burning land, like a bonfire on St. John's night," he sang softly, and his voice had a melancholic texture that made Emily's heart tighten. She stood there, one hand unconsciously resting on her prominent belly, watching that man who continued to surprise her. The baby moved, as if it were also listening to the music, and the movement made her involuntarily sigh. David opened his eyes immediately, interrupting the music. "Emily, I didn't know you were here." "Sorry," she said, feeling her cheeks flush. "I didn't mean to interrupt. You play beautifully." David lowered his eyes to the guitar, almost as if he were embarrassed to have been caught. "It's an old hobby. My grandfather taught me when I was a kid, back in Springfield." "Springfield?" she asked, moving closer and carefully sitting in one of the nearby chairs. "I didn't know you were from the countryside." "I spent the first 15 years of my life there," David explained, gently strumming the strings. "My grandfather had a small farm, and during school vacations I would stay with him. That's where I learned to play, where I heard the stories that made me understand that music can be a bridge between people." There was a nostalgia in his voice that touched something deep in Emily. "And you never played for anyone here at the company?" David chuckled softly, a sound lacking much humor. "Just imagine the CEO playing guitar at the summer festival. It would be the end of my corporate credibility. Or it could be the beginning of something much more authentic," Emily gently countered. "People need to see that you are human, David, that you have a story, that you have a heart. He looked at her with an intensity that made her feel butterflies in her stomach, even with her huge belly. "Do you always challenge me like this?" "Only when I see potential being wasted," she replied with a smile. "And I have a proposal for you." David raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Play at the festival. Just one song, something that means something to you." "Emily," he began to protest. "Everyone will be relaxed in their summer clothes, eating peanut brittle and drinking hot-spiced drinks. It will be the perfect moment for them to see you as you really are, not just as the distant boss." David fell silent for a long moment, alternating his gaze between her and the guitar. Finally, he began to play a soft melody, a song that she didn't immediately recognize. "This song," he said, "my grandfather used to play for my grandmother every afternoon when the sun set over the mountains. It was his way of saying he loved her without using words. The melody was simple but filled with emotion." Emily closed her eyes and let herself be carried away by the sound, feeling the baby calm in her belly as if it were also being rocked by the music. "It's beautiful," she whispered when he finished. "Do you really think you should play at the festival?" David asked, and there was an uncertainty in his voice that made her want to hug him. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Trust me." During the following week, Emily worked tirelessly to organize all the details of the festival. Against all medical expectations and David's silent protests, she personally oversaw the decoration of the building's winter garden, the typical menu prepared by a catering company specializing in summer festival food, and even the hiring of a traditional accordion player from Texas who had moved to New York. Mary, David's secretary, watched everything with a barely concealed expression of disapproval. "Don't you think you're overdoing it for a corporate event?" she commented on a Thursday, as Emily adjusted the colorful banners she had hung throughout the venue. "It's important for the team," Emily diplomatically replied, although she had sensed a growing hostility in the older woman's posture. "Moments like these strengthen the bonds between colleagues." Mary murmured, her eyes following every movement of Emily with an attention that seemed almost predatory. "I hope Mr. Smith appreciates all this effort." There was something in her tone that made Emily feel uncomfortable, but she couldn't quite identify what it was. Instead, she focused on finalizing the preparations, ignoring the growing pain in her back and the swelling in her feet that had been intensifying with the long hours on her feet. The night of the party finally arrived on a chilly Friday in June. The winter garden had been transformed into a true festival ground, adorned with colorful bunting, paper balloons, tables with checkered tablecloths, and a small makeshift stage where the accordion player was tuning his instrument. Emily arrived wearing an adapted square dance dress that she had sewn herself, navy blue with red and white details, featuring a flared skirt that elegantly disguised her 8-month baby bump. She had braided her hair into 2 pigtails with colorful ribbons and wore more pronounced makeup than usual, with red lipstick and rosy cheeks. When David saw her, he paused in the middle of a conversation with the CFO. He was dressed as a country folk character, a red checkered shirt, jeans, suspenders, and a straw hat that somehow accentuated the masculinity of his features. But it was the expression on his face upon seeing her that made Emily's heart race. "You look beautiful," he said as he approached, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Thank you," she replied, feeling herself blush. "You also look different in a good way." The atmosphere was lively, with employees from all departments, mingling, chatting, and laughing more relaxed than Emily had ever seen in the office. The smell of corn pudding, corn cake, and hot-spiced drink lingered in the air, mixed with the aroma of the flowers decorating the space. "Ready to see your boss play guitar?" David asked, a nervous smile playing on his lips. "More than ready," she replied. "You're going to be a hit." When the time came, David stepped onto the small stage with the guitar in hand. A gradual silence fell over the crowd as people realized the CEO was preparing to perform. "Good evening, everyone," he began, and Emily noticed a slight hoarseness in his voice that revealed his nervousness. "As some of you know, our event coordinator for tonight, Emily, convinced me to share something a little more personal this evening." All eyes briefly turned to Emily, who smiled encouragingly from her spot near the stage. "This song," David continued, "was taught to me by my grandfather out in the countryside of Texas. It was his way of showing love without needing many words, and I thought it might be a good way to show you all how much I appreciate the work and dedication of the entire team." He began to play the same melody he had played for Emily in the conference room, but this time he added lyrics, a simple song about the value of the people we choose to have in our lives. His voice, initially shy, gained confidence as he noticed the positive reaction from the audience. Emily felt her eyes welling up as she watched him. There was the man she had seen in their late-night conversations, vulnerable and authentic, revealing himself to all his employees. There was something profoundly courageous about what he was doing, and she felt proud to have been part of the motivation that brought him there. When the music ended, there was a moment of silence before an enthusiastic round of applause echoed through the garden. Emily saw tears in the eyes of some people, genuine smiles on faces that usually wore closed professional expressions. David stepped down from the stage amidst the congratulations and went straight to where she was. "Thank you," he said simply, but there was a world of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you for trusting me," she replied. The rest of the night passed in a blur of music, dancing, and animated conversations. Emily danced a square dance, laughed more than she had in months, and watched David interact with the employees in a completely new way. Closer, more human. It was almost midnight when the party began to disperse. Emily was sitting in one of the chairs, resting her swollen feet, when David approached. "Can I give you a ride home?" he offered. "That would be great," she accepted, grateful not to have to face a taxi at that hour of the night. His car was a sleek, dark Mercedes, but he drove carefully through the empty streets of New York, obeying every traffic light and speed bump. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with a new intimacy that had blossomed during the party. "You changed something today," Emily finally said when they stopped in front of her building in Brooklyn. "What do you mean?" David asked, turning off the engine and facing her. "The way people looked at you, the way you looked at them. There was a genuine connection there that didn't exist before." David was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. "It was scary," he admitted. "But it was also liberating. It had been so long since I allowed myself to be truly seen." Emily felt the baby move in her belly, as if reacting to the emotion in the air. Without thinking, she placed her hand where she had felt the movement. "Is everything okay?" David asked immediately. "Yes," she smiled. "He's just reminding me that he's here. I think he liked the music." David looked at her belly with an expression she couldn't fully interpret. "Can I—" he started, then seemed to realize what he was about to ask, and blushed. "Sorry, that was inappropriate." "It wasn't," Emily said softly. "Do you want to feel?" With a gentleness that surprised her, David extended his hand. Emily guided it to the spot where she had felt the movement, and almost immediately, as if the baby had been waiting, there was another kick. David's eyes widened. "Wow," he whispered. "He's strong." "Very," Emily laughed, "especially when he hears music. I think he's going to be an artist like David's grandfather." The casual reference to the baby's future, somehow connecting him to David's story, created an intimacy between them that neither was fully prepared to face. "Emily," David said, his voice rougher than usual, "there's something I need to tell you." Say it. She looked at him, her heart racing with the intensity in his eyes. These past few months, getting to know you, having these conversations, you've changed something in me. Something I thought was dead forever. The baby kicked again, as if participating in the conversation, and they both laughed softly. David, she started, but didn't know how to finish. There was so much she wanted to say, so much she felt, but also so much fear of opening up again. I know it's complicated, he said quickly. I know you're going through a lot, that you have other priorities, but I needed you to know that you've become very important to me. Emily felt her eyes welling up. You've also become important to me, she whispered. More than I should, considering the circumstances. They sat there, his hand still resting on her belly, looking at each other with a mix of desire and uncertainty. Outside, New York continued its nightlife, but inside the car, time seemed to have stopped. Maybe, David finally said, we can figure out together where this leads us. No rush, no pressure, just see what happens. Emily nodded, not trusting her own voice. When they finally said goodbye, with a careful hug and a soft kiss on the cheek, she went up to her apartment, feeling that something fundamental had changed between them. And for the first time in months, she fell asleep smiling, with the melody of David's grandfather echoing in her mind, and the sensation of his hand still warming the spot where the baby had kicked. August arrived with an emotional intensity that Emily hadn't expected. The contractions began on a Tuesday morning while she was reviewing contracts at home. During her early maternity leave, labor lasted 14 exhausting hours, and throughout that time, she wondered how different it would have been if she had someone holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. Michael Johnson was born at 3:47 a.m. on a Wednesday, weighing 7.1 pounds, and with a vigorous cry that echoed through the New York maternity hospital. Emily, exhausted but radiant, looked at her son's red, wrinkled face and felt a wave of love so intense it took her breath away. "Hi, my love," she whispered as the nurse placed the baby in her arms for the first time. "You finally arrived." Michael opened his dark little eyes, just like hers, and seemed to look at her with a comical seriousness for a newborn. Emily laughed through her tears, thinking how David had been right when he said she would be an amazing mother. It was on Thursday morning, while she was still recovering in the hospital, that a nurse appeared in her room carrying a flower arrangement that looked like a work of art. White and pink roses mingled with lilies and gerberas, in an elegant and delicate bouquet, unlike anything she had ever seen. "Delivery for Emily Johnson," the nurse announced with a smile, "and there's a box, too." Emily frowned, confused. Her mother had visited the night before, but she wasn't the type to spend money on expensive arrangements. The box was large and wrapped in craft paper with a simple yet elegant jute bow. Carefully, she opened the card that accompanied the flowers first. The handwriting was masculine and familiar. "For dreams to have a place to rest. Congratulations on Michael's arrival. With love, David." Emily's heart raced. He had remembered, not just remembered, but had taken the time to send flowers. And a gift. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the box. Inside, carefully wrapped in soft fabric, was a handcrafted wooden crib. It wasn't a typical store-bought crib. It was a unique piece, clearly handmade, with delicate carvings on the sides forming small stars and moons. The wood was light cherry, polished to a shine, and there was a small metal plaque affixed to one side with the inscription, "Michael, may your dreams be as big as your courage." Emily covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filling with tears. The generosity and thoughtfulness behind that gift left her completely speechless. It wasn't just a crib, it was a declaration that he cared, that he had thought of her and the baby during all those days. "Oh my God," she whispered, running her hands over the smooth wood. "Michael, look at the beautiful gift you received." The baby, sleeping soundly in her arms, seemed to smile in his sleep, as if approving the choice. It was on Friday, when she was home trying to adjust to the new routine with Michael, that she discovered the extent of David's care with that gift. The florist called to confirm if she had received everything in order, and during the conversation mentioned something that made Emily's heart race. "It was so sweet to see the baby's father choosing each flower personally," the woman commented. "He spent almost 2 hours here last Thursday, wanting to know the meaning of each species. He said he wanted something that represented new beginnings and hope." "The father?" Emily repeated, confused. "The gentleman who ordered the flowers. David, right? Tall, elegant, very attentive. He made a point of explaining that the pink roses symbolize gratitude and admiration, and the white ones represent new beginnings. The lilies were my idea. They mean purity and motherhood." Emily hung up the phone with her heart tight with emotion. David had spent 2 hours at a florist, learning about the meaning of flowers for her. The image of him, always so controlled and efficient, dedicating so much time and care to something so personal, made her realize that his feelings for her were much deeper than she had imagined. That night, after nursing Michael and putting him to sleep in the new crib, which fit perfectly in the little corner she had prepared in the room, Emily picked up the phone several times to call David, but always backed out at the last minute. What to say? How to thank someone for something so meaningful without seeming like they were overacting? It was Michael who resolved the situation. On the following Monday, when she finally gathered the courage to call the office, the baby chose that exact moment to let out one of his most vigorous cries. "David Smith!" the familiar voice answered on the other end of the line, and Emily felt a tightness in her chest upon hearing it. "David, it's—" "Emily," she said, trying to speak over Michael's cries. "Sorry for the noise, it's Michael." "Emily." His voice immediately warmed. "How are you both? Is everything okay?" "We're fine, yes. I called to thank you. The crib is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the flowers." She paused, feeling her voice choke up. "It was so much more than I expected." "You liked it?" David asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that she rarely heard. "I didn't quite know what to choose. I've never bought a gift for a baby." "It was perfect," Emily said sincerely. "More than perfect. I heard from the florist that you spent hours personally choosing the flowers." There was a pause on the other end, and she could almost imagine David blushing slightly. "I wanted it to be special," he admitted. "You both deserve special things." Michael chose that moment to stop crying, and a comfortable silence settled on the line. "David," Emily said softly, "would you like to meet him? Michael, I mean. When you have time, of course." "Really?" The surprise in his voice was evident. You want me to meet Michael?" "Of course I do. You were one of the most important people to me throughout the pregnancy. It's only fair that you meet the result of all this." "I would love to," David said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "When would be a good time?" "How about this afternoon? Around 3. That's when he tends to be calmer after feeding." "I'll be there," he promised. When David rang the doorbell at 3 o'clock that afternoon, Emily felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. There was something profoundly intimate about introducing her child to someone, especially someone who meant so much to her. She opened the door wearing a light blue blouse and comfortable jeans, her hair down over her shoulders. David was more casual than she had ever seen him. Dark jeans, a white shirt, and a navy blazer, no tie. He carried a small bag and looked almost as nervous as she felt. "Hi," he said with a small but genuine smile. "Hi," she replied. "Come in, please." Her apartment was small but cozy, decorated with simple yet well-chosen furniture. There were feminine touches everywhere, colourful cushions, plants in the windows, family photographs on the walls. The scent of lavender lingered in the air, mixed with the sweet aroma of baby powder. "So," Emily said, gesturing toward the sofa, "would you like to meet Michael?" David nodded, and she noticed his hands trembling slightly as he set the bag down on the floor. Emily went to the crib, the same one he had given as a gift, and picked up Michael, who was sleeping soundly. The baby was dressed in a light blue onesie that highlighted his dark little eyes and fine black hair. "Michael," she whispered, "there's someone here who wants to meet you." The baby slowly opened his eyes, blinking a few times before focusing on his mother's face. Then, as if sensing the presence of a new person, he turned his head slightly in David's direction. "Oh my God," David whispered, and Emily saw something break in his expression. He is perfect. Do you want to hold him?" Emily offered. David hesitated. I don't know if I know how." "It's easier than it looks," she assured him, moving closer. "Just support his head and body." With infinite gentleness, David extended his arms, and Emily placed Michael in them. For a moment, the baby seemed to study the new face, his little eyes moving as if trying to memorize every detail. "Hi, Michael," David said softly, his voice rougher than usual. "It's a pleasure to meet you." As if responding to the voice, Michael made a small sound, something between a sigh and a coo. David chuckled softly, a sound filled with admiration and tenderness. "He likes you," Emily observed, sitting beside him on the sofa. "He's amazing," David said, looking at the baby with an expression of complete enchantment. "He has your eyes. And a strong personality." "That definitely didn't come from me," Emily joked. "Yesterday he cried for 2 hours just because he didn't like the music I was playing." David laughed, and the sound made Michael open his eyes again, focusing on his face with renewed interest. "I brought something for him," David said, gesturing to the bag he had left on the floor. "You didn't have to bring anything else," Emily protested. "The crib was more than enough." "It's nothing big," David assured. "It's just something I thought he might like." Carefully not to disturb the baby too much, he reached into the bag and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a handcrafted rattle, also made of wood, painted in soft colors and making a delicate sound when shaken. "My grandfather made one just like this for me when I was a baby," David explained. "I thought that maybe Michael could have one too." Emily felt her eyes welling up. The connection he was creating between his own childhood and Michael's future was deeply touching. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Thank you for all of this, for being here, for caring so much." David looked at her, then at Michael, who had fallen asleep again in his arms. "How could I not care?" he asked softly. You both have become very important to me." The weight of that confession hung between them, laden with all the implications neither of them was ready to fully explore. But there on that sunny afternoon, with Michael sleeping in his arms, with David's arms around Emily and the future stretching ahead full of possibilities, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to have someone to share not only the difficult moments, but also the small daily miracles of motherhood. And when David finally left, after spending 2 hours holding Michael and chatting about everything and nothing, she watched him from the window as he walked toward his car. He paused on the sidewalk, looked up in her direction, and when their eyes met, he smiled in a way that made her heart race. That night, as she rocked Michael to sleep, Emily softly hummed the melody that David had played at the company summer festival, and for the first time since the baby was born, she didn't feel alone. September brought Emily back to work, along with a series of challenges she hadn't fully anticipated. Balancing breastfeeding with corporate hours, dealing with the exhaustion of sleepless nights, and maintaining the same level of professional productivity proved to be a Herculean task that left her drained by the end of each day. It was a Tuesday when she noticed that something had subtly changed in the dynamics of the office. She had arrived at 8 in the morning, as she always did, but discovered that David had also adjusted his schedule. Traditionally, he arrived at 7 and left around 6 in the evening, maintaining a strict routine that everyone knew. Now, however, he seemed to be synchronizing his hours with hers in such a discreet way that it took her weeks to notice the pattern. "Good morning," he said, meeting her in the elevator on a Thursday morning. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee, one of which he offered to her. "I thought you might need an extra today." "Thank you." Emily gratefully accepted the coffee, inhaling the aroma that helped her wake up completely. "How did you know I would need it?" "Experience," David said with a small smile. "I saw the light in your apartment at 3 in the morning, when I passed by yesterday." The casual confession that he had been in her neighborhood at that hour made her look at him with curiosity, but he didn't offer any further explanations. The new routine gradually established itself. David began working later, often staying in the office until 9 or 10 at night. Emily, who needed to pump milk during work hours and often fell behind finishing tasks due to interruptions, found that those extra hours became an oasis of tranquility where she could fully concentrate. It was during those nighttime periods that the magic truly happened. With the office empty and quiet, they developed a natural and unforced intimacy. David worked in his office with the door open while Emily organized processes at her desk. The sound of her softly humming while pumping milk became a familiar soundtrack, and he found he could concentrate better with her gentle presence in the environment. "Are you singing Blue Skies again?" David commented one September night, appearing in the doorway of her cubicle with a cup of chamomile tea. "Michael loves that song," Emily explained, discreetly adjusting the breast pump under her shirt. "He always calms down. When I sing, I think it reminds him of your guitar at the company summer festival." David smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "How is he? Sleeping better?" "A little," she sighed. "Last night we managed 4 hours straight, which was almost a miracle." "That must be exhausting," he observed, noticing the subtle shadows under her eyes. "Are you sure you shouldn't be working part-time?" "I can't afford that luxury," Emily replied honestly. "And besides, those nighttime hours here have become important to me." The look they exchanged was loaded with unspoken meaning. Those nighttime moments had become a refuge for both of them, a space where they could just be themselves without the complications of corporate hierarchy or social expectations. "It is for me, too," David admitted softly. It was on one of those nights that he made a decision that surprised even himself. Emily was having trouble storing the milk she had pumped. One of the refrigerators on the floor had broken down, and she was visibly worried about waste. "Use the refrigerator in my office," David offered. "There's a small one in there. It always works perfectly." "Are you sure?" She hesitated. "I don't want to impose—" "Emily," he said, firmly, "stop apologizing for being a mother." The phrase hit her with unexpected force. For weeks, she had felt as if she were constantly apologizing, for being a few minutes late when Michael cried at the end of the day, for needing breaks to pump milk, for being less available for happy hours or company social events. "Thank you," she said, and there was more gratitude in that word than he could imagine. From that night on, a new intimacy developed between them. David's office, once an untouched corporate sanctuary, became a shared space where Emily stored her milk and where, occasionally, they would have coffee together while reviewing contracts. It was a Thursday in October when Michael made his first unofficial appearance at the office. Emily had gone to get the milk from David's refrigerator when she received a desperate call from the nanny. The woman had suddenly fallen ill and wouldn't be able to stay with the baby until Emily returned from a friend's house in the countryside. "Bring him here," David said without hesitation when she explained the situation. "But David, it's an office. I can't bring a baby." "It's my office," he reminded her. "And besides, it's past 7. There's no one else here." 40 minutes later, Emily was back with Michael in her arms, carrying a bag full of diapers, baby bottles and toys. The baby, now 2 months old, was more alert and responsive, his little eyes moving curiously around the new environment. "Hi, Michael," David said softly, approaching them. "Welcome to the office." As if recognizing the voice, "Michael." Emily turned her head in David's direction and gave one of her toothless smiles that melted anyone's heart. "I think he remembers you," Emily observed, noticing the baby's immediate reaction. "Can I—" David gestured, and she understood immediately. "Of course." As he held Michael in his arms, David felt that overwhelming sensation of protection and tenderness he had experienced the first time. But now there was something more, a familiarity, a connection that seemed to deepen with each encounter. "He's grown," David observed, marveling, "and he's stronger." "Much stronger," Emily confirmed. "Last week he managed to roll over by himself." They spent the night working with Michael present, taking turns holding him when he became restless. David discovered he had a natural talent for calming him. His deep voice seemed to have an almost hypnotic effect on the baby. "You're a natural at this," Emily noted, watching David gently rock Michael while she finished reviewing a contract. "It's strange," David admitted. I never imagined myself in this kind of situation." "And how do you feel?" she asked, genuinely curious. David looked at Michael, who had fallen asleep comfortably in his arms, then at Emily, who was watching him with a warm and open expression. "Complete," he finally said, his voice almost a whisper. The confession hung between them, laden with implications that both felt, but neither was ready to address directly. Instead, they continued working in comfortable silence, with Michael sleeping in David's arms and the city lights of New York twinkling through the windows of the 23rd floor. It was Sarah, David's secretary, who broke that growing harmony. The following Friday, she arrived earlier than usual and found evidence of Emily's presence in David's office, some containers of breast milk in the refrigerator, and a forgotten bib on the table. "Mr. Smith," she said when David arrived, her voice laden with barely concealed disapproval, "we need to talk about appropriate protocols in the office." David looked at the items she had placed on his desk, evidence of the previous night, and felt a wave of irritation. "What protocol, Sarah?" "Well, sir, it's not appropriate for employees to use your personal space for non-professional activities. And bringing children to the office, that could set dangerous precedents." The way she said non-professional activities, as if pumping breast milk was something inappropriate or shameful, made David clench his fists. "Sarah," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "I suggest you focus on your own responsibilities and let me manage mine." "But, sir, other employees might misinterpret." "Other employees don't work until 10 at night handling contracts that keep this company running," David interrupted firmly. "And if they have time to gossip about their colleagues' personal lives, maybe they need more work to do." Sarah stepped back, clearly surprised by the firmness of his response, but David could see in her eyes that this would not be the last time she tried to interfere. That afternoon, when Emily showed up to work later, David found her hesitating at the entrance of his office. "Can I use the refrigerator?" she asked, but there was a formality in her voice that hadn't been there before. Of course, he replied, watching her closely. Did something happen? Emily hesitated, then sighed. Sarah stopped me in the hallway today. She said it might be better for me to find alternatives for storing the milk, that it was causing comments. David felt a wave of anger that surprised him with its intensity. She had no right to say that to you. Maybe she's right, Emily said softly. Maybe I'm being inappropriate. Emily, look at me, David said, standing up and walking over to her. You're not being inappropriate. You're being a dedicated mother trying to balance professional and personal responsibilities. And anyone who has a problem with that can bring their concerns directly to me. The intensity in his voice made her look at him in surprise. David, Sarah works for me, not the other way around, he continued. And this company functions better because you're here, not despite you being here. Emily felt her eyes welling up with unshed tears. Thank you, she whispered. You don't need to thank me, David said softly. And Emily? The next time someone makes you feel bad for being a working mother, come talk to me immediately. That night, as they worked side by side with a renewed and more conscious intimacy, they both realized that their connection had deepened beyond mere attraction or friendship. They were becoming a team, not just professionally, but in something much more fundamental. And when Michael unexpectedly arrived again, this time because Emily's mother had to take a neighbor to the hospital, David did not hesitate for a second to extend his arms to receive him. "Welcome back, little one," he said, and Emily noticed there was something possessive and protective in the way he held her son, something that made her heart race and filled her with a hope she thought she would never feel again. October arrived with a twist that no one had predicted. Emily was organizing the quarterly reports on a rainy Thursday when Sarah appeared at the entrance of her cubicle with an expression that mixed malicious satisfaction and false concern. "Emily," she said, her voice artificially sweetened, "there's someone at reception asking for Mr. Smith. A very elegant woman. She said she is his wife." Emily's blood ran cold. She knew David was divorced, but she had never considered the possibility that his ex-wife could reappear, especially not now, when she had finally begun to believe that there might be a possible future between them. "Ex-wife," she automatically corrected, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, yes," Sarah said. But there was something in her tone that suggested the distinction was not important. "Well, she's waiting in the meeting room." "Main meetings." Mr. Smith seems surprised. Emily forced herself to keep typing, as if the information hadn't just turned her world upside down. "Thank you for letting me know," she said, though she didn't understand why Mary felt it necessary to share that information with her. "You're welcome," Mary replied, but remained there, clearly waiting for some more dramatic reaction. When she was finally alone, Emily allowed herself a few moments to process the information. Victoria. That was the name of David's ex-wife. She had mentioned it once, briefly, during one of their late-night conversations. The woman who had betrayed David with his best friend and business partner, destroying not only their marriage, but also their original company. For the next 2 hours, Emily tried to focus on her work, but her eyes kept drifting to the hallway leading to the conference room. She could see the silhouette of two people through the frosted glass, gestures that seemed at times tense, at times intimate. When David finally emerged from the meeting, his face was an impenetrable mask that she hadn't seen in months. He walked past her cubicle without looking in her direction, heading straight to his office and shutting the door harder than necessary. Emily stared at the closed door, feeling as if an abyss had opened between them. The woman who left the conference room minutes later was exactly as she had imagined, tall, blonde, dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than Emily's monthly salary. Victoria Anderson walked with the confidence of someone who knew exactly the effect she had, and when she passed Emily's cubicle, she made a point to look directly at her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be Emily," she said, stopping unexpectedly. "David told me about you." "He did," Emily managed to respond, though her throat was dry. "Of course, it's always important to know the people who work so closely with him." The pause before work was deliberate and laden with implications, especially now that we're considering a reconciliation. The words hit Emily like a punch in the stomach. Reconciliation? Well, 3 years is long enough for people to mature, don't you think? David and I have had time to realize that what we built together was too special to be thrown away because of misunderstandings. Misunderstandings, as if betrayal was just a small disagreement between civilized adults. "I'm sure you two have a lot to discuss," Emily managed to say, forcing a professional smile. "We do," Victoria confirmed, adjusting the strap of her Hermes bag on her shoulder. "And Emily, thank you for taking such good care of him while I was away. But now that I'm back, I'm sure you understand." Emily understood perfectly. The message was clear. David had merely been a temporarily unoccupied territory, and now the true owner had returned to reclaim it. After Victoria left, the office fell into a tense silence. Emily tried to get back to work, but the woman's words echoed in her mind. David had spoken about her to his ex-wife. What exactly had he said? And more importantly, what had he responded about the possible reconciliation? At 6 in the evening, when most employees had left, Emily still hadn't seen David come out of his office. Normally, he would show up around that time to talk about evening plans, about work that needed to be finished, about nothing and everything at the same time. But the door remained closed. At 7, she began to pack her things, pretending to herself that she wasn't waiting for him to appear. At 8, she accepted that whatever conversation they had had, it had changed everything between them. It was when she was waiting for the elevator that she heard footsteps behind her. "Emily!" She turned around, finding David standing in the hallway. He looked exhausted, as if he had aged years in a single afternoon. There was something broken in his expression that made her momentarily forget her own pain. "Hi," she said softly. "We need to talk," he said, gesturing toward his office. Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to run, to avoid any conversation that might confirm her worst fears. But another part, the part that had learned to trust him over those months, made her follow. His office was messy, with documents scattered across the desk as if he had been urgently searching for something. There were 2 coffee cups on the table, both untouched and already cold. "Please sit down," David said. But he remained standing, walking to the window. "David," she began, "you don't owe me explanations about your personal life." "I do," he said firmly, turning to face her, "especially after what happened between us, after everything." Emily felt her heart race. So there was something between them. She hadn't imagined the connection, the growing intimacy, the moments laden with meaning. "Victoria reappeared because she found out the company is doing well," David began, his voice bitter. "Not out of love, not out of nostalgia. For money." "How do you know?" "Because she brought documents," he said, gesturing to the table. "Evidence that Mark, my former partner, manipulated documents at the time of the divorce. Documents that could have completely changed the asset division." Emily frowned. "Manipulated how?" "He forged signatures, altered contracts, made it seem like I was hiding assets. At the time, I was so emotionally devastated that I accepted the terms of the divorce without questioning. I just wanted it to be over. And now?" David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she recognized as a sign of extreme stress. Now she wants a second chance, says she was manipulated by Mark just as much as I was, that he convinced her I was having an affair. Do you believe her? That's what's been driving me crazy all afternoon, David admitted. Part of me wants to believe that our story had some meaning, that it wasn't all a lie. But, Emily encouraged, though she feared the answer. David looked her directly in the eyes. But when she was talking about reconciliation, about starting over, all I could think about was you, about Michael, about how impossible it would be to go back to a life that didn't include both of you. Emily's heart stopped for a moment, then raced. David, I know it's complicated, he continued quickly. I know you have other priorities, that maybe this isn't the right time. But I need you to know that when I think about the future, you're in it. Both of you are. Emily felt her eyes burn. And what did you say to her? I said I need time to process the information about Mark, but I also made it clear that my life has changed, that I have changed. David stepped closer to her, stopping a few steps away. Emily, when I met you, I was convinced I would never be able to trust anyone again. You proved me wrong. And what if she was really manipulated? Emily asked, though the question hurt. What if you both deserve a second chance? David shook his head. Even if she was manipulated, even if our separation was based on lies, I can't go back to something that existed before I met you. You changed who I am, Emily. Changed what I want out of life. What do you want out of life? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. I want to wake up thinking about how to make you smile, David said, taking another step closer. I want to come home knowing there's someone who cares whether my day was good or bad. I want to help Michael take his first steps, hear his first words. I want to build something real, something based on who we are now, not who we were before we met. Emily stood up from her chair, feeling her legs tremble. David, are you sure? Because I can't go through this. Again. I can't fall in love with someone who might change their mind. You fell in love with me? He asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that made her want to hug him. Yes, she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. Despite all the logic, despite all the reasons why it's complicated, I fell in love with you. David closed the distance between them, raising his hands to gently touch her face. Then let me prove that you can trust me. Let me prove that when I say I want to be in your life, in Michael's life, it's forever. How? She whispered. Let me fight for you both, he said. Let me show you that you are my priority, no matter what ghosts from the past appear. Emily looked into his eyes, searching for signs of doubt or hesitation. Instead, she found a determination that made her believe that maybe, finally, she had found someone willing to fight for what they were building together. All right, she finally said. But David... Yes? If you change your mind, if you decide you want to go back to your old life, promise me you'll be honest with me. Don't let me find out through others. I promise, he said, leaning down to gently kiss her forehead. And Emily, I'm not going to change my mind. That night, as they left the office together, for the first time openly intimate, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe some risks were worth taking, that maybe it was possible to build something lasting even amidst the chaos. But as they walked to the parking lot, neither of them noticed Sarah watching from the ground floor window, a phone in hand and a satisfied expression on her face. The war for David's heart had only just begun. November arrived laden with an almost palpable tension that permeated every floor of Smith & Associates corporate law. Emily had noticed small changes in the office routine that individually seemed insignificant, but together formed a disturbing pattern that left her uneasy. It started with small incidents, important emails disappearing from her inbox, Meetings being cancelled without her prior notification. Contracts mysteriously vanishing from her desk, only to reappear in the wrong department days later, causing delays that jeopardized important deadlines. It was a Monday when she discovered that her presentation for Energy Corp's clients had been cancelled without her authorization. Emily had worked 3 weeks on the legal analysis of the project, and the meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. There was a misunderstanding, Sarah explained with a false look of concern when Emily sought her out. The client requested a postponement. I thought you had been informed. By whom? Emily asked, feeling a growing irritation. By the secretary of the legal department. Anna, I think, Sarah said, but there was something evasive in her tone. Well, these things happen. I'm sure it will be rescheduled. But when Emily went to speak with Anna, she found out that the woman had been on medical leave for a week, and when she called the client directly, she was informed that they had never requested any postponement. Something strange is going on, she commented to David that night as they were working late. Michael was peacefully sleeping in the makeshift crib they had set up in his office, a cushioned basket that allowed her to work while caring for the baby. What do you mean? David asked, looking up from the contracts he was reviewing. Small sabotages, nothing that can be proven, but it's like someone is trying to make me look incompetent. David frowned, immediately alert. Give me examples. Emily recounted the incidents from the past weeks, the missing emails, the cancelled meetings, the misplaced documents. As she spoke, she saw David's expression progressively close off. Why didn't you tell me this before? He asked when she finished. Because I initially thought they were coincidences, Emily admitted. And then I thought maybe I was being paranoid. New mom, unregulated hormones, you know. You're not being paranoid, David said firmly, and I have a suspicion about who might be behind this. At that very moment, as if summoned by the conversation, Sarah appeared at the door of the office. In the office, Mr. Smith, she said, her voice artificially sweet. Sorry to interrupt, but your ex-wife is on line 1. Ex-wife, Raphael automatically corrected, but Emily noticed he didn't mention that Victoria had called 3 times that week. Of course, Sarah smiled, but her eyes remained cold. She said it's urgent, something about the documents you were discussing. Raphael hesitated, looking at Emily. Since their conversation in October, they had established radical honesty between them, but she sensed that Victoria's constant presence was affecting him, more than he admitted. Answer it, Emily said softly. I'll finish organizing the merger contracts. But when Raphael answered the phone, she couldn't help but overhear fragments of the conversation. Victoria's voice, even filtered through the phone, carried a familiar intimacy that made Emily's stomach churn. Raphael, darling, I've found more evidence about Mark's manipulations. Yes, documents you need to see. No, I can't send them by email, it's too sensitive. How about we have dinner together to discuss? Emily pretended to focus on the papers, but each word felt like a small stab. When Raphael finally hung up, she avoided looking at him. It was about the case against Mark, he explained, but there was something defensive in his voice. She found more evidence. I see, Emily said, keeping her tone neutral. Emily, look at me, Raphael asked. When she finally raised her eyes, she saw frustration and something that looked like guilt in his expression. It's not what you're thinking. I'm not thinking anything, she lied. You are, and you have the right to feel that way. But I need to resolve this situation with Mark before I can fully move on. Move on with what? She asked, though she feared the answer. With our life, Raphael said simply. With the future I want to build with you. That night, Emily went home with a heavy heart. Michael was particularly restless, as if he sensed her tension, and she spent hours trying to soothe him while her mind spun with doubts and insecurities. It was nearly 2 in the morning when her phone rang. "Raphael." "Hi," she answered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Were you sleeping?" he asked. "Sorry, I saw the light in your apartment on when I passed by, and you passed by my apartment at 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep," Raphael admitted. "I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation, about the way you looked at me when I hung up the phone." Emily closed her eyes, leaning against the kitchen wall where she was trying to warm a baby bottle. "Raphael, I cancelled dinner with her," he said abruptly. "What? Dinner?" "I cancelled it. I told her I could send the documents by courier or schedule a meeting at the office with our lawyers present." Emily felt something loosen in her chest. "Why?" "Because I realized that regardless of what Mark did or didn't do, I don't want to leave room for misunderstandings. I don't want you to feel insecure about us." "And the documents?" "They'll have to wait," Raphael said firmly. "Some things are more important than resolving the past, like building the future." Emily felt her eyes burn. "Thank you," she whispered. "Why?" "For choosing me, for choosing us." "Always," Raphael said, his voice soft through the phone. "Emily?" "Yes?" "Tomorrow we will find out who is sabotaging your work. And when we find out, that person will have to deal with me." The next morning, Raphael arrived at the office. With a determination that Emily hadn't seen since Victoria reappeared, he spent the morning making discreet calls and reviewing email system logs, tracing a pattern that confirmed his suspicions. "It was Sarah," he said when they met for lunch. His voice was controlled, but Emily could see the contained anger in his eyes. "She has administrative access to the system. She was the one who cancelled your meetings, redirected your emails, borrowed your documents for other departments." "Why?" Emily asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Because she's trying to force you out of the company, and I found out more. She was the one who told Victoria about us, about our late-night schedules, about Michael coming to the office." Emily felt a wave of nausea. "She was spying." "For years," Raphael confirmed. "Sarah always thought she had some kind of ownership over my personal life. When I started working late with you, when it became obvious that there was something between us, she decided to interfere," Emily completed. "And she will pay for it," Raphael said, a hardness in his voice that she rarely heard. "I've already called HR. She will be fired for cause. Today." "Raphael, are you sure? If she's been working here for so long—" "Emily," he interrupted, taking her hand across the table, "she not only sabotaged your work, she violated your privacy, tried to destroy our relationship, and jeopardized important company contracts. There's no going back." That afternoon, Emily watched from a distance as Sarah was escorted out of the building by security, carrying a small box with her personal belongings. The older woman's expression was pure hatred when her eyes met Emily's through the office windows. "It's over," Raphael said, appearing beside her. "She can't hurt you anymore." But even with Sarah out of the way, Emily knew her problems were far from over, because that night when she got home, she found a letter in her mailbox. Inside, there was only one handwritten line. "He always comes back to me, V." Emily stared at the letter for a long time, then crumpled it and threw it in the trash. But Victoria's words echoed in her mind for the rest of the night, planting seeds of doubt that she feared could grow and destroy everything she was trying to build with Raphael. Michael, as if sensing her restlessness, cried more than usual that night, and when she finally managed to get him to sleep, it was nearly 3 in the morning. She stood there beside the crib that Raphael had gifted, watching as she watched her son sleep. She wondered if she was being naive to believe that someone like David could choose a simple life with her, instead of returning to the glamorous world he had shared with Victoria. Outside, unbeknownst to her, David was sitting in his car on the street, staring at the dark windows of her apartment and battling his own demons. The letter from Victoria had also arrived for him, with a different but equally disturbing message. Mark is willing to tell the whole truth about the manipulations, but only if I convince him that our reconciliation is real. Meet me tomorrow to discuss how to resolve this once and for all. You know where to find me. David crumpled the letter and tossed it onto the passenger seat, resting his forehead on the steering wheel. Every decision he made now would affect not only his future, but also the future of Emily and Michael, and for the first time since he had fallen in love with her, he wasn't sure what the right choice was. December arrived, laden with a tension that seemed to envelop New York City like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The summer rains had started earlier than usual, turning the afternoons into a dramatic spectacle of dark skies and lightning that perfectly mirrored the emotional turmoil Emily felt growing inside her. It was a Tuesday when she discovered she was pregnant again. The positive test stared back at her from the bathroom of her apartment like a revelation that would change everything once more. Emily sat on the edge of the bathtub for nearly an hour, the test in her hand, trying to process the reality that in a few months Michael would have a little brother or sister. The first emotion was pure panic. How would she manage to care for two babies alone? How would she explain to David that she was pregnant with his child when their relationship was still navigating turbulent waters because of Victoria? How would she deal with the professional complications that would surely arise? But when the initial panic subsided, a wave of something resembling joy washed over her. That baby was the result of the night when she and David had finally surrendered completely to each other, a week after Mary's layoff, when the built-up tension had exploded into a mutual confession of feelings, followed by hours of intimacy she would never forget. It had been a Thursday when everything changed between them. Emily was working late, reviewing contracts in David's office with Michael sleeping in the makeshift crib, when he received a call that made her see his raw vulnerability for the first time. "Yes, I understand," David had said on the phone, his voice gradually losing all color. "When?" "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." When he hung up, he stood still for a long moment, staring at the phone as if he couldn't fully process the information. "David?" Emily had asked softly. "Is something wrong?" "My grandfather," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "He had a heart attack. He died this afternoon at the ranch." Without thinking twice, Emily got up and went to him, wrapping him in a hug that he initially resisted, as if he was still trying to maintain his emotional armor. But then something broke inside him, and he pulled her against him with desperate strength, burying his face in her neck. "He was the last link I had to who I used to be," David had murmured against her skin. "Before everything got complicated, before I learned not to trust anyone. He was the only person who still saw me as the boy who played guitar on Sunday afternoons." Emily had held his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "I see that boy," she said softly. "Every time you play guitar, every time you hold Michael, every time you truly smile, he's still here, David." That was when he kissed her for the first time, a desperate kiss filled with pain and need, and a tenderness that made her forget all the complications, all the obstacles, everything except the fact that she was in love with that broken and brave man who held her heart in his hands. They made love that night in her apartment after putting Michael to bed. It was different from anything Emily had ever experienced, not just physically, but emotionally. There was a mutual surrender, a vulnerability that went beyond desire. David touched her as if she were precious, as if she were the most important thing in the world, whispering words of love in mixed English and Spanish that made her cry with emotion. "I love you," he had said when they were lying down afterward, her nestled against his chest as he traced lazy circles on her back. "I love you in a way I didn't even know was possible." "I love you too," she had replied, kissing his chest where she could feel his heart beating strongly. "No matter what happens with Victoria, with the past, with anything, I love you." And now, 6 weeks later, she was pregnant with the man she loved, but who had been gradually distancing himself as Victoria intensified her campaign to win him back. Emily tucked the pregnancy test away in the drawer of the dresser and decided she wouldn't tell David until she figured out what was happening between them. If he chose Victoria, she would raise both children alone. If he chose her, well, that would be a wonderful surprise to share. But keeping the secret proved more difficult than she had imagined. The morning sickness returned with full force, and she found herself running to the bathroom several times during work. Hours. David, ever observant, began to notice. "Are you okay?" he asked one Thursday morning when she returned from the bathroom looking visibly pale. "Maybe you should go home." "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "It must be something I ate yesterday." But David watched her with that characteristic intensity that made her feel as if he could read her thoughts. "Emily, if something is wrong—" "Nothing is wrong," she insisted. She quickly interrupted. "Just a little tired. Michael still isn't sleeping through the night." It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth, and she hated lying to him, especially when she could see the genuine concern in his eyes. The situation became even more complicated when Victoria showed up at the office on Friday, unannounced, with a completely new strategy. "David, darling," she said, entering his office as if she still had marital rights, "I brought a proposal that could resolve everything at once." Emily was in the room, organizing some contracts, when Victoria arrived. The woman greeted her with a glacial politeness before turning completely to David, as if Emily were irrelevant. "Mark has agreed to confess everything," Victoria announced dramatically, "but there's a condition." "What condition?" David asked, though Emily could see from the tension in his shoulders that he already suspected the answer. "He wants our reconciliation to be official, public. He wants to make sure there will be no retaliation after he admits the manipulations." "Official how?" David asked, but his voice was dangerously calm. "An engagement, darling. A small ceremony just to make things legitimate." Emily felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Instinctively, she placed her hand on her belly, where she knew a new life was growing, a baby who might never know his father if David accepted. "That proposal? You're crazy," David finally said, standing up from his chair. "I'm not going to pretend to be engaged to get a confession." "It wouldn't be pretending," Victoria said softly, moving closer to him. "David, you know there's still something between us. There's still love, there's still history. And now that we know the truth about what really happened—" "The truth," David interrupted her, "is that you chose to believe Mark instead of fighting for our marriage. The truth is that you disappeared for 3 years and only came back when you knew my company was doing well. And the truth is that I'm in love with someone else." Victoria quickly glanced at Emily, who had gone pale as a sheet. "In love," she repeated, as if the word were strange. "With a pregnant employee who works for you. David, be realistic." "You be realistic," David shot back, his voice filled with a rage that Emily rarely heard. "Emily is worth 10 of you. She's strong, she's principled, she's capable of unconditional love. She saw me at my worst and didn't run away. She made me want to be a better man." "And her child?" Victoria asked, venom dripping from each word. "Are you going to raise another man's child as if it were your own?" "I will raise Michael as if he were mine because he already is, David said without hesitation. Family isn't just blood, Victoria. It's choice, it's commitment, it's unconditional love, things you apparently never understood. Victoria fell silent for a moment, processing the definitive rejection. When she spoke again, her voice had a coldness that made Emily shiver. "Very well," she said. "But remember, David, without my cooperation, you will never be able to prove what Mark did. And he has information that could destroy not only you, but your precious company and all the employees who depend on it." "Is that a threat?" David asked. "It's a fact," Victoria replied. "You have until Monday to reconsider. After that, Mark will disappear, and with him, any chance of justice." After she left, the silence in the room was deafening. Emily could hear her own heart beating, mixed with the distant sound of traffic in New York below. "Emily," David finally said, "I would never—" "I know," she interrupted, though her voice trembled slightly. "I know you wouldn't do that to us. But David, what if she's telling the truth? What if Mark really has information that could harm the company? Then we deal with the consequences," David said firmly. "But I'm not going to negotiate with blackmail, and I'm not going to pretend to love someone when my heart belongs completely to you." Emily felt her eyes sting. It was the perfect moment to tell him about the pregnancy, to give him one more reason to fight for their future. But looking at the stress on his face, at the weight of the decisions he had to make, she decided to wait a little longer. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "We're going to find another way to expose Mark," David said, walking over to her and taking her hands. "No matter how long it takes or how much it costs. I won't sacrifice our happiness for revenge." That night, Emily went home with her heart divided between hope and fear. David had made his choice. He had chosen her and Michael above all. But what if the price of that choice was the destruction of everything he had built? While bathing Michael, preparing him for sleep, she spoke to the baby as she always did. "Dad David is going through tough times," she whispered, gently massaging his hair with shampoo. "But he loves us, my love. He chose us." Michael giggled, splashing his little hands in the water, and Emily smiled through her tears. "And you're going to have a little brother or sister," she continued, "someone to play with, to share secrets, to protect you when Mum and Dad aren't around." That's when her phone rang. David. "Hi," she answered, balancing the phone between her shoulder and her ear while lifting Michael out of the bathtub. "Emily." His voice sounded strange, filled with an emotion she couldn't identify. "Can you come here, to my house? It's important. Now, David, it's almost 10 at night, and Michael—" "Bring him," David said quickly. "Please, Emily, I need to show you something. I need you to see who I really am before you make any decisions about us." There was something in his voice that made her forget all practical objections. "Okay," she said. "We'll be there in an hour." As she dressed Michael and gathered the necessary things for a nighttime visit, Emily couldn't stop thinking about David's tone. There was an urgency. There was a vulnerability that made her realize that night would be definitive for them in some way, whether to unite them forever or to separate them completely. David's house in the Upper East Side was completely different from what Emily had imagined. Instead of the cold modern decor she expected to find, she encountered a warm and surprisingly personal environment, solid wood furniture mixed with antique Persian rugs, and the walls were adorned with photographs that told the story of a life she had never fully known. "Come in," David said, opening the door with an expression that mixed nervousness and determination. He was casually dressed, jeans and a grey t-shirt that accentuated the color of his eyes, but there was something different about him, as if he had made an irrevocable decision. Emily entered carrying Michael, who was awake and curious about the new surroundings. The baby looked around with wide eyes, making small sounds of interest as he observed the soft lights illuminating the room. "Your house is beautiful," she said sincerely, admiring the harmony between elegance and comfort. "It belonged to my grandmother," David explained, taking the diaper bag from her hands. "When she passed away 5 years ago, I renovated it but kept its essence. It's the only place where I still feel myself." He guided them to the living room, where Emily noticed something that made her stop abruptly. On the grand piano occupying a corner of the room, there were dozens of framed photographs, but what caught her attention were not the old family photos, but 3 recent photographs that were prominently displayed. One was from the company summer festival, capturing the exact moment when David played guitar on stage, with her smiling in the audience. The second was a photo she didn't know had been taken, she and David working together in the office, with Michael sleeping in his arms. The third photo took her breath away. It was Michael alone, sleeping in the handcrafted crib that David had gifted, with a ray of sunlight illuminating his little face. You have photos of us in your house," she whispered, still processing the discovery. "I do," David confirmed, moving closer to her. "Because you too have become my family, Emily. The family I chose, the family I want to protect and love for the rest of my life." Emily felt her eyes welling up, but before she could respond, David continued. "But I didn't bring you here just to show you photos," he said, his voice becoming more serious. "I brought you because I need you to fully understand what's at stake, and I want you to make a decision, knowing everything." He led her to the sofa, waiting for her to sit with Michael before positioning himself in front of her, as if preparing for an important confession. "This afternoon, after Victoria left, I made some calls," David began. "I spoke with lawyers, private investigators, people I've met over the years, and I discovered some things that completely changed the situation." Emily adjusted Michael in her arms, the baby now quietly playing with the buttons of her shirt. "What kind of things?" "First, Mark doesn't have the information that Victoria claims. In fact, he's desperate to make a deal because he's being investigated for tax evasion. The confessions he's offering are fabricated, hoping to gain immunity." Emily frowned. "How did you find that out?" "Because one of the investigators I hired knows someone in the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI, David explained. "Mark has been under surveillance for months. If he had real evidence against me, he would have used it as leverage by now." "And does Victoria know this?" "That's the second discovery," David said, his expression hardening. "Victoria is not a victim of Mark. She is his partner in a consulting firm they created with the money they obtained during our divorce. She knew about all the manipulations from the beginning." Emily felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "So all this, the reconciliation, the tears, the claims that she was manipulated, all lies," David confirmed. "Their plan was simple. She would return to my life, gain access to the company's information, and then find a way to blackmail or sabotage the business." "Oh my God," Emily whispered. "And what if you had believed her? What if you had accepted the reconciliation?" "For a moment, I almost did," David admitted, and the raw honesty in his voice made her look at him more closely. "Not because I still loved her, but because part of me still carried guilt for the failure of the marriage. Because a small part of me wondered if I deserved a second chance to make things right. And what changed your opinion?" David stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city lights stretching to the horizon. "You," he said simply. "Every time Victoria talked about going back to the past, about fixing something that was broken, all I could think about was how impossible it would be to return to a life that didn't include you and Michael." He turned to face her, and there was an intensity in his eyes that made her catch her breath. "Emily, I don't want a second chance with my past. I want a first chance with my future, with our future. Michael chose that moment to let out a small coo, as if approving the speech, making them both laugh despite the seriousness of the conversation. "But there's something else you need to know," David said, moving closer to her. "Something that might change your opinion about all this." "What?" Emily asked, although her heart was already racing with anticipation. David knelt in front of her, taking her free hands in his. "I'm going to give up the company," he said. "What?" she exclaimed, almost making Michael jump in surprise. "I'm going to sell my share to my minority partners," David explained calmly. "With the money, I'm going to open a smaller office focused on family law and social consulting, something that makes a difference in people's lives instead of just moving money from one place to another." Emily stared at him, completely shocked. "David, you can't do this. This company is everything you've built. It's your life." "No," he gently interrupted her. "My life is you two. The company was just a way for me to hide, to avoid real relationships, to protect myself from being hurt again. But now that I've found you, I don't need protection anymore." "And what if it doesn't work out between us?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What if you regret it?" David smiled, and there was a peace in his expression that she had never seen before. "Then at least I will have tried to live for real, instead of just surviving." Emily looked at Michael, who had fallen asleep in her arms during the conversation, then back at David, who awaited her response with a brave vulnerability that made her realize this was the moment of truth for them. "David," she finally said, "I have something to tell. You too." "What?" Emily took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back after what she was about to reveal. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. David stood still for a moment as if processing the words, then his eyes widened. "Pregnant?" he repeated, his voice almost inaudible. "For 6 weeks," she confirmed. "Since that night? After your grandfather's funeral?" David stared at her for a long moment. Then gradually a smile began to form on his lips, a smile so radiant and genuine that it completely transformed his expression. "We're going to have a baby," he said, as if testing the words. "Our baby." "Yes," Emily confirmed, feeling tears of relief streaming down her face. "If you want to. If you—" She was interrupted when David leaned in and kissed her, a soft yet deep kiss that spoke of promises, of shared futures, of love that had grown against all odds. "Of course I want to," he murmured against her lips. "I want everything with you. Marriage, more kids, a lifetime of lazy mornings and working nights together." "Marriage?" Emily repeated, surprised. David laughed, realizing what he had said. "Well, yes, if you want. Not now, not in a hurry, but yes, I want Michael and our baby to grow up knowing that their parents choose each other every day, not just once." Emily looked at him, really looked. She saw the man he had become during the months they had known each other, the man who had learned to trust again, who had chosen love over protection, who was willing to give up everything he had built to start a new life with her. "Yes," she simply said. "Yes." "What?" "Yes to everything," she laughed, adjusting Michael, who was still sleeping soundly. "Yes to marriage, yes to life together, yes to building something new and real and ours." David kissed her again, then kissed Michael's forehead, and Emily knew she had found her place in the world. Not just as a mother, not just as a professional, but as part of a family she had chosen to create based on love, trust, and the courage to start anew. Outside, New York continued its frantic life, but inside that house, which now felt like home, 3 people had found the peace that comes from knowing that, no matter the challenges ahead, they would face everything together. And when Michael opened his little eyes and smiled at David, as if he instinctively knew he had gained a father, Emily knew her family was finally complete. July 2026 arrived with the golden sun of New York summer illuminating the small maternity ward of the New York Maternity Hospital, where Sophia Smith Johnson decided to make her entrance into the world at exactly 6:23 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Unlike the dramatic and solitary birth of Michael, this time Emily had David by her side during every contraction, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement that kept her strong during the 8 hours of labor. "She's perfect," David whispered, tears streaming freely down his face as he held their daughter for the first time. Sophia was born weighing 7.5 pounds, with dark hair like her mother's and a serene expression that contrasted with the vigorous cries Michael had presented at birth. "She has your eyes," Emily observed, exhausted but radiant, watching David carefully cradle the baby. "Eyes that see the best in people." Michael, now almost a year and a half, had been brought by Emily's mother to meet his sister. The boy, who was already walking with the determined spirit of the family, looked at the baby with serious curiosity before reaching out his little hand to gently touch her face. "Sister," he said, one of the few clear words in his still limited vocabulary, making everyone in the room laugh tenderly. "Yes, my love," Emily said, stroking her son's hair. "This is your little sister, Sophia." The adjustment to life with 2 children was challenging, but in a completely different way than the desperate loneliness Emily had faced with Michael. David had fulfilled all the promises he made that revealing night in December. He sold his stake in the company to the partners, and with the money, he opened the office Smith & Johnson Family Law, a name that symbolized not only their professional partnership, but personal as well. Smith & Johnson, Emily had joked when he proposed the name. "Sounds like a family business." "That's exactly what it is," David had replied, kissing her gently. "We are a family business now." The new office was smaller, located in a charming building in the West Village, with only 3 rooms and a lean team of 5 employees. But the satisfaction David felt at the end of each day was incomparably greater. In September, when Sophia was particularly difficult to calm, David suggested something that would change everything again. "What if we moved to Springfield?" he said suddenly, rocking Sophia while Emily tried to convince Michael to take a nap. "To visit?" she asked distractedly. "To live," David clarified, and that made her stop completely what she was doing. "To live?" she repeated. "I inherited my grandfather's ranch a few months ago," David explained. "It's a small place, but it has a nice house and enough land for the kids to grow up free. We could open a branch of the office there, helping people who really need legal assistance but don't have access in the big city." Emily looked at Michael, who had stopped resisting the nap and was now listening to the conversation with interest, then at Sophia, who had finally calmed down in her father's arms. "Would you leave New York? Your whole life is here." "My life is where you are," David said simply. "And maybe it's time to give our children the same childhood my grandfather gave me. With space to run, with time to dream, with the certainty that they are unconditionally loved." Emily considered the proposal for a few weeks, discussing the pros and cons, researching professional opportunities in the area, imagining what it would be like to raise Michael and Sophia in a completely different environment than she had originally planned. It was one October afternoon when they were all in the backyard of their house in New York, Michael chasing butterflies while Sophia watched the world from the blanket where she was lying, and David played guitar under the shade of the old tree, that Emily knew what the answer was. "When do we move?" she asked, interrupting. "The music." David stopped playing and looked at her in surprise. "Really? Really?" she confirmed, "but with one condition." "What?" Emily smiled, looking at the happy children playing, then back at the man who had turned her lonely nights into a life full of love and purpose. Promise that no matter where we are, you will keep playing guitar for us every Sunday afternoon." "I promise," David said, sealing the agreement with a kiss that tasted of the future, of new beginnings, and the certainty that they had found something that would last forever. 3 months later, on a December morning that marked exactly 2 years since that first rainy night when they met working late, they loaded their things into the moving truck and said goodbye to New York. Michael, now almost 2 years old, held his father's hand tightly while watching the men carry the boxes. Sophia, at 5 months, slept peacefully in her mother's arms. And Emily, looking at the house that had been their first home as a family, felt not nostalgia, but gratitude. "Ready?" David asked when all the boxes had been loaded. "More than ready," Emily replied. As they drove along the roads that would lead them to their new life in Texas, David began to softly sing "Blue Skies," the song that had played that first night when Emily discovered his secret talent. Michael tried to follow the lyrics with his still-developing language, and Sophia woke up and listened with interest, as if she already knew that this was the family's soundtrack. And when they arrived at David's grandfather's ranch, with the old but well-kept stone house, with the mountains stretching as far as the eye could see, with the silence broken only by the singing of birds and the laughter of children, Emily knew she had found much more than love. She had found home. That first night at the ranch, after the children had fallen asleep in their new rooms, David and Emily sat on the wooden porch overlooking the moonlit mountains. "Did you know?" Emily asked, snuggling against his chest. "Know what?" "On that first night when you found me working late, did you know we would end up here, with all of this?" David was silent for a moment, stroking her hair as he considered the question. "I didn't know exactly that," he admitted. "But I knew you had changed something fundamental in me. I knew that when I looked at you, I saw possibilities I had stopped believing existed." "What kind of possibilities?" "The possibility of loving without fear. The possibility of being vulnerable and still strong. The possibility of building something real instead of just protecting something empty." Emily kissed his chest, where she could hear his heart beating strong and steady. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," David replied, "and I love the life we've built together. I love that Michael will grow up running through these fields, that Sophia will learn to walk on this porch, that we will grow old together in this place that means family and unconditional love." From inside the house, they heard Michael stirring in the crib, whispering something that sounded like dad music, even in his dreams. David smiled, picked up the guitar that was leaning against the wall, and began to play softly, creating a lullaby that floated through the Texas night. And there, under the stars shining brighter away from the city lights, with the children sleeping safely in their rooms, and the future stretching ahead full of promises, Emily Johnson Smith knew she had found exactly where she belonged. The 14 months that had begun with an accidental discovery on a rainy December night had transformed into a lifetime of love, growth, and the deep certainty that the best beginnings sometimes emerge from the most unlikely endings.